Hi guys, welcome to the Tony Wong podcast. Our guest today is Noel Wax. He's the CEO of the Groundswell group. He's also been a friend for 35 years. I'm honored to have him as our guest. Up until recently, he was a self-professed good corporate guy. He worked for CBS Sports Radio as the vice president of CBS Sports Radio. But then he found himself always running and chasing after something that he didn't really want. He found his work not as fulfilling as he would like, and so he branched out and started his own business. He is the CEO of the Groundswell group, and they connect brands to nonprofits. And through this work, Noel brings his passion and he sees it as a way to do some good in the world. And we're going to talk about that as well as who he thinks he is and who we actually see him to be. So welcome, Noel. Thanks for listening. 5, 6, and now and leading into 7, because it feels like it's all tied together. And I'm not quite sure how to do that. I was thinking about reading it, but maybe I'll just casually go over it. Ron and I were talking about renaming the podcast. And you know what I didn't tell you is that idea of trajectory generation, humans navigating this decade, is very similar to what I told Jikyo, my Zen master. What I really wanted to do was help people navigate this crazy changing world.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So that could work.
Same thing.
What do you think you're renaming it?
What?
The TW show?
No, it's currently the TW show.
Right. Oh. Stretch it out. Call it the Tony Wong show.
Well, it's actually called the Tony Wong podcast.
It's even longer. It's even longer.
Yeah,
It's the Tony Wong podcast.
No. So we're talking about renaming it trajectory generation. Humans navigating this decade. What do you think?
It's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah.
It's a big word.
Yeah.
Trajectory generation.
Trajectory. So is that all-encompassing in your mind? From like the trajectory generation, is that sort of, are people intended to fit in with that or feel like they associate with that in some way?
So it's like the idea that we are at the precipice of something.
Right.
And I think it does kind of feel like we're at the precipice, at least to me, we're at the precipice.
Civil War comes to mind.
Yeah. Well, in listening to your last podcast you did, I mean, I definitely connected with that idea of there is so much happening, obviously, right? I mean, that's an understatement, but it could potentially be the beginning of something if it truly does move, right? It moves towards that, or else it falls flat again, as it has numerous times before. Right. But I guess never has it been all these things happening simultaneously. Right.
Well, I mean, so this is like what happened in episode 5. We talked about how the old uber competitiveness of our educational system, as well as the culture in tech, creates these uber competitive products. And so now the products that are ubiquitous and everyone uses every day of their lives are based in this competitive get more likes, get more views thing. And it's all generated and designed to heighten our emotions so that we either get that dopamine spike, that would be a great thing, but it's more of like this FOMO of missing out, like I need to be better, I need to get more likes. And so that's not going to change. I mean, that just, it's just reaching its peak now, 2018, 19 now. That's not going to change. And then in episode 6, we talked about how meditation is really starting to take root in tech and how that's on a collision course with that one-sided uber competitive mindset. Because as you meditate, you get to understand that's dualistic. That's in this world of like right and wrong that we all made up, and which is very similar to left brain thinking, all this rational thinking. When you meditate, you get access to the non-dualistic, where there isn't a right and wrong. You begin to realize we made that shit up, right? And then you start accessing the right side of the brain, which can handle oxymorons that can handle a paradox, right? Which is more closer to reality. And so then we get into episode 7, which is you are not who you think you are. Your thoughts, beliefs, and emotions do not define you, right? And
you'll be excited to hear that I completely disagree with that, but I'm excited for the conversation.
So just for viewers, I know we talked about this earlier just today, but I was on your webinar.
Networking after work talk, I think.
Right.
Yes.
Was it last week or the week before?
It was last week.
It was, geez, everything feels...
No, that's not true. It was the week before.
Okay, good.
Yeah, yes.
So I'm on this thing, right? And Noel doesn't know I'm going to be on. I saw it on LinkedIn. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'll go watch Noel. And I don't know how, there were like 50,000
50,000
viewers, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Or 50.
Yeah. Somewhere in between.
I saw it peak at maybe, I think we got into the 6 figures. Sorry, not 6 figures, 3 figures.
3 figures.
At one point.
Okay, yeah.
I like my kids when they watch Facebook Live. Like, there's 61 people, there's 112. So I stopped watching that and actually paid attention to what I was saying.
Okay. So what was interesting about it, I figured it's on networking. And, you used to be the vice president of CBS Sports. Networking and sales was your thing. And it fit your personality, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm watching him, and he starts telling stories about how, like, it really takes him a lot of effort to be this gregarious, outgoing guy. And I'm like, what the fuck? I've known you for 35 years. Mm-hmm. That was the thought of hanging brain.
Right.
Came up.
Yeah.
So I've known this guy, and he is the most gregarious, outgoing guy, athlete, right? We dated a lot, let's say.
Fair.
Right?
Yeah.
And he's
35 years ago.
35, yes.
Right.
A long time ago, way before the wife and kids.
Before the wife and kids, right. Before swiping.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so he's talking about, like, he gets a box at a game, right? And he buys a nosebleed ticket out of his own pocket, mm-hmm. right? Just so you can escape and gather yourself. And I'm like, what the fuck? And then you're talking about how you're really an introvert. And I'm like, so I start typing in Zoom to everyone. I'm like, WTF. You should listen. You should listen to this guy, because if he thinks he's an introvert, wow, he's really overcome it, because that's not the dude I know. So
it's funny you say, because like, as you're typing one, are those our friends from 35 years ago? Like, you won't believe what Noel just admitted to, or generally?
No, I said
this is a complete disconnect from what I had imagined it to be. Yeah, it's interesting because it doesn't take as much. When I think about it, it doesn't take as much effort now to do that, because I think I've become more in touch with my own sense of self, but also balanced with. I spend a lot of time. What's the profanity tolerance?
Whatever you're comfortable with, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. In the sort of, I don't really care what you think about me, or I don't really give a fuck.
Right.
Portion of it, and those two things really had to connect a lot better for me to be even more comfortable. So I just, as an example of, like, I was not. I've known you for a really long time. You're a dear, dear friend. So there's a different level of comfort or discomfort. But under normal circumstances, yes, driving over here would have been a whole ordeal for me. Just the thoughts under normal circumstances. But it's funny because the way that we have already had talked about it, it wasn't as much now, and it's not as much now. But if I think about, I do still wake up each day and think, okay, which meetings or experiences with people can I reschedule? What can I cancel? What can I get out of? What can I control? What's my exit out of those things? I still show up. I definitely show up. But it was, that's a really good example of the Yankee Stadium thing. Like, we had the suite, and by the 3rd inning, I had left, and I'd go up and sit by myself for a little while, and it wasn't as much like I needed to take my deep breathing or meditate. I'd walk around the stadium, but I felt like I'd created or fabricated this sense of reality that people could buy into, right? Where it's like, it seemed to be, okay, I know they're going to think I'm really busy. I have to go off and meet a whole bunch of other clients in the stadium, so I'm going to go off and, Noel's just got to go run off. And because I I guess my sense of it was like I could probably do, it's almost like a stand-up comedian. I've got 25 or 30 minutes, and then after that I'm done, right? I've sort of used up all my material, and it's that sort of thing at the party, like I gotta go to the bathroom. That usually is a sign that I'm uncomfortable in the situation. I've got to escape for a little bit, and maybe that means escape and leave entirely, or it's just go to the bathroom and sort of take those couple of deep breaths.
So let's take a quick poll. Do you see any introvert in this person?
Yeah, it wouldn't be my first guess, right? For sure. Right.
Okay, so maybe, I don't know how many minutes we are into it, but I'm just going to spill my point of view, spill the beans. So here's the thing. People's beliefs change over time, right? People's temperament changes over time. People, they have thoughts that they don't, we all have thoughts and we're not in control of them. They could just come and go. Our emotions, if you let them, come and go. And then from a physiological standpoint, every cell in our body changes over every 7 years, right? So what my point is, there's nothing fixed. Everything around us is fixed. So if you're present and adapting to each moment and responding, there's no fixed introvert. So I'm not saying that you were never an introvert. I'm just saying that you may have felt that at some point in time and responded that way. But as the world changed around you, you would have had to change with it, which means you wouldn't have been an introvert. For example, people's perception of a person is reality. What I argue isn't reality are the thoughts and beliefs and the shit that goes on in your head, which we'll talk about later. Like, we have political and social polarization over masks, and people make it about being American. And for me, that's so many levels of logical leaps that they have to make of, wearing a loosely held piece of fabric over your face to protect other people from germs to un-American, right? Mm-hmm. That's like this left brain fixation on a belief and identifying with it, right? Such that that video you sent me of that Florida dude who's like, I will not be muzzled like a mad dog. And he looks like a mad dog. And he's like frothing, right? Sure. He's talking to city council. And you're looking at it, the guy, and you're just like, oh my God, you are so stuck in your head and you're getting so riled up. This guy's in his late 60s. And he looked like he was gonna have a heart attack over this thing. Mm-hmm. Over what? Over his beliefs that this is somehow un-American.
Right. Well, there's such a, to that point, when the context or our ability to see a perspective other than our own can be extraordinarily complicated. If we are able to see it in the context that you just described, specifically talking about mask, like the physical mask as opposed to the metaphorical mask, that's a hard thing for us here, I think, in this country uniquely to see. It's like it isn't so much about me and what I'm aspiring to, what I'm trying to accomplish, what I'm trying to collect, my material possessions. It is really about the goodness of all, or looking out for other people so that either we can get through this faster.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so it's I think that is a huge shift that a lot of people would have to make, but many aren't seeing it that way, or a lot of the younger generation that just feel invincible and don't think about how that's connecting back to all the people that they could potentially affect by that. So, I mean, there's so much depth to that presses on so many things and so many complications and complexities that many people I don't think understand. But I want to go back to the point you made about sort of the introvert extrovert.
Yeah.
And I guess I struggle with, to me, a lack of importance of those things necessarily aligning. I feel like it would be an incredibly tireless and almost unattainable effort to align those two things, although it would be nirvana. And we talked a little bit earlier, like the ultimate achievement would be when what we think of ourselves aligns with what other people think of us. And I tried that for a really, really long time. Like, okay, am I matching up? Am I as outgoing and gregarious as people think I am to move to? Is that really important for those things to align? And it just feels like to have those things match up would be an inconquerable effort. And that's where that part of I don't necessarily care as much about that as it is just sort of showing up. And if I'm upset or frustrated, I show up that way. If I'm happy, I can show up that way too. So does that make sense? Where it's sort of like the alignment sounds like Nirvana, where introvert, extrovert, matching up with what other people think of me, but impossible.
But isn't that reality? Like, if you got a heavy enough dose of people being like straightforward with you and very honest about their opinion of you, if you heard 5, 10, 15, 20 people all say the same thing of the experience of you, isn't that you and not what you think?
Tony, when you said you were surprised, when you listened to that and you were surprised, that I got goosebumps. I just got them again. I get goosebumps. I'm like, that is such a cool thing to hear, because ultimately that's what I would want people to think. And I don't care as much like extrovert, just more like, yeah, outgoing, fun, cool person to be around, hang out with, socialize with. And over time, I've absolutely heard that, but I don't know that it's not. I mean, certainly that's the balance of like not seeking that feedback, right, and just showing up versus hearing it unrequested. Like when you just offered that, I was like, wow, that's awesome to hear. And I definitely feel more like that now, like those two things are closer aligned, but I think it's because I cared less about it. I'm not controlling my environment or trying to control my environment as much as I did for a long time. I guess,
but I mean, how many times have you been the life of the party? Like if you can give a story.
Oh God, I mean, when I
wish we could talk about that.
I wish we could too.
We can edit it out. We can just see how it goes.
I don't know if that's the life of the party story. I just remember, like I felt, or I think I came off or appeared as being what I would call fearless. I would go up to anybody, man or woman, the most attractive woman in the room, but also fun and carefree. I mean, I felt like that was sort of my approach. Like I guess I would be like typical Vegas weekends or parties or trips to Mexico.
We were at Superba, right? Superba in Venice. Just a business lunch, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you had that waitress in the palm of your hand, just screwing around.
Yeah.
I mean, that's your normal.
There was nothing at stake. That's the part that helps. When there's not something at stake, I don't have something to lose. I'm not risking my. I mean, it never felt good to be turned down if I was really interested. Like, let's say in that example, it's easy. Like, especially if I'm doing it for someone else. I've loved on occasion living vicariously through other people. Like, right. I've had so many fun times with buddies. Like, I met this girl and I don't know what to say or how to do it. It's almost like there was a movie. Was it Pinocchio with Steve Martin or Roxanne? Remember Roxanne? Yeah. Great example. I've so many times felt like Steve Martin with the super big nose, right? It's like I can talk the talk. If somebody else is the beneficiary of that, that's so good, because then I don't have to completely show myself. I know it's crazy to hear, but yeah, all those, like nothing at stake. It's Superba, fun, entertaining. I mean, I know I can be those things, right. But there was also nothing at stake there. If I added the layer on of like, I'm single and I think she's incredibly attractive and I'm interested in meeting her or going out with her, that's a whole different deal.
Oh, so that's your little trick.
Yeah.
So can you imagine how many introverts that I've come across in Riot that would hear this conversation and be like, what the fuck? If that guy thinks he's an introvert.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think, as we're talking, I think we're talking about a flavor of imposter syndrome, right? Where it's throughout tech at every level. You never lose it, no matter how high up you get or your list of accomplishments or how wealthy you get or any of these things. And it's probably worth a longer conversation about how that also may be affecting some of the problems we've been talking about, right? Like, because you got to figure probably even Mark Zuckerberg has imposter syndrome. I mean, right. I would think most billionaires are probably like, what the hell, what am I doing with $1 billion, right? Elon Musk is probably one of the few guys that may not. I don't know. Like, but
I only have a few billion.
yeah, I only have a few billion, and I know what I'm doing with it, and like he's got a plan. But I think that's part of it, and definitely worth diving in. And then I think the other thing, talking about reality, right? Like the hack that you mentioned, I have nothing at stake. Thinking about some of, when I try to be funny or whatever, I'm definitely way more comfortable when there's nothing at stake. Mm-hmm. And I tend to recognize when that is. Where maybe 20 years ago, I never thought through any of that stuff. It was always, like, I'm never going to see these people again, so why does it really matter?
Mm-hmm. But there's layers of hacks, because you can convince yourself that even if there is at stake, that's not really at stake. There's plenty more, like relationships or whatever.
That's right, but
opportunities.
But it all depends on being conscious enough to see the reality of the moment you're in, right?
Yes.
And
there we go.
So you're definitely you're able to do that, right? Like, and I think digging into how you recognize, like in Hollywood or whatever, they call it breaking the fourth wall. You're leaving the reality of the movie and you're entering what everybody perceives as the real reality, which actually probably isn't even the real reality at that point, right? But having that awareness so that you can kind of push through the filter bubble you're in and enter someone else's, or stay outside of a group of these bubbles people are living in, and move a little more freely, right? And try to impact or change it, whether trying to be funny or trying to get some other outcome. I think that'd be interesting to try to dive into.
Well, I mean, that begs the question of, let's say, the episode is about you are not who you think you are. You are not your thoughts, feelings, emotions, or beliefs. Those things do not define you. So that almost begs the question of, well, who are you then, right? Mm-hmm. So I have an opinion of that, but I'd like to hear you guys, if you guys believe that everything changes, right? And that we adapt to every situation and respond differently to them based on our thoughts, feelings, and emotions of that time and the circumstance. And yet and physically, every cell changes over every 7 years completely, then who the hell is Noel? Or who is Ron? How can there be...
I'd like to take the who is Ron part of that question, if I may.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ron...
Introvert, exactly.
Yeah.
I like the interaction, though, because it's funny, as we have this conversation, I so often would like to... I haven't been able in my entire life to play the part of sit back and take a lot of stuff in, and then I get access to so much more information that way. Not only, sure. There were times when it serves, when you think about sort of partnerships or relationships or business, the more you're able to take in, the more you can accomplish. So it's like I just had a moment like, God, that would be so cool if I could be Ron in this moment and have taken in some stuff before I just started blabbing away, because that's usually my way to go. And it's like, all right, there you go. You guys go ahead and create your opinion based on what that is. But I can say now, who is Noel? Still a massive work in progress, but there's certain things that I know that I like, and I'm trying to do more of those things. And certainly the last few months have allowed me to focus a lot more on getting rid of some of the distractions, a lot of the distractions,
right.
Narrowing the focus of the people that I want to spend my time with, even being more conscious of thoughts, feelings. I have been meditating lately. We talked earlier about Michael Jordan and the stuff that drives him. So I think I'm a more simplified version of myself than I have ever been. And I almost feel like if we're recycling our genes every
cells,
I feel like I'm on a new cycle now, which is really cool. And I hope it's a good 7-year cycle, if I can extend it beyond that. But I would say, to use some adjectives or terminology, I'd like to think of myself as a lot more thoughtful now, a lot more compassionate now, a lot more interested in less relationships, but more meaningful relationships than more of those. In business, it's been incredible because in the beginning of this whole COVID time, I found myself chasing so many things, trying to keep the business afloat. I had a really fun, good career in corporate America at CBS for a long time, but running my own business, chasing something. And all of a sudden I put pause. I'm like, this isn't working. I sort of entered this theory into my mind of, which I think is very true, we are attracted to that which retreats. And there was something really, I was like, just stop running, stop chasing, just be the person that you are, show up, be there for people, have these really meaningful conversations with people. And then it started to come back. It was really, really cool. Less, but really the more meaningful relationships that I've forged over the last, not friendships of 35, but business relationships for 25 and 30 years. People started reaching out and saying, hey, is there something that we could be doing together? I like the way you've carried yourself for all these years, and I've seen you doing this business, and I kind of want to figure out a way to be part of it. I was like, wow, that's really cool. Yeah. But it wasn't until I stopped. But that's perpetual. Is this constant, like, okay, let me analyze this situation, this relationship. Am I pushing it too hard? Am I treating it like, what's that adage of like the right way to hold a bird, right? Not too tight to squeeze it and kill it, but just enough so it doesn't let fly. So that's where I feel like I am now, is that sort of that gentle, delicate balance in relationships and relationships with people, and really trying to show up. Like, I feel like I'm showing up now as who I am in a conversation and dialogue. I think some of the nervous energy has run off a little bit. Now it's kind of like, okay, settle in. And that's where I feel like life is for me. I also, I want to say, I feel like I'm a really good, very present dad. I love that role. And that's teaching me so much. And I mentioned earlier too, it's like I'm seeing a lot in my son that is so frustrating. When I take a pause, I'm realizing, okay, that is me. That's either me now or that was me then. And maybe try a different kind of an engagement with that type of personality so they can work a little bit better and a little smoother. So I think I guess I would describe it as just sort of hoping to be more thoughtful, calm, present, and compassionate is the way I would sort of describe me now.
I mean,
Ron, no kidding.
Ron, you want to do him up?
Yeah, look, I think it's a super interesting question, right? Because we've been having a lot of these conversations about everyone's living in the reality they've created, and then social media and all of its forms, and then just the general pressures from the economy or whatever shapes that reality more. And the algorithms in particular now are really starting to shape it, especially for a lot of people who aren't aware of what the algorithms are doing to them. So it can be really hard, I think, to really figure out who you are today if you don't really think through it. And it sounds like you've thought through it pretty well and have made some really deliberate choices of who you want to be. Right. And I think a lot of people go through life, I know I did for a really long time, and probably still fall into it, where you're kind of just along in the river of life kind of thing, and you're not making a lot of deliberate choices. You might make a choice like, hey, I'm going to get in the car and drive to work, and then maybe you get in a car accident and that changes your life, right, or something, or you run into some random person or someone you haven't met before in a long time, and that may shift something for you. But you're not really making a lot of deliberate choices of who you want to be and what reality you really want to create around you. And then how do you, enhance that reality so that, or expand it so that you pull your family into it and your friends and your associates, because they're all living in kind of their reality too. And so it's a tug of war to kind of pull everybody to some broader view of life, right? That's for you. And that's been a work in progress for me too for a while. And it sounds very much we're on similar journeys. Because kids are, my kids are still relatively young, and how do you have a positive impact on them that's probably different than the impact your parents had on you? And not that, the parents may have had some positive, but there was some negative along the way. And then whenever I make a mistake, it's usually an emotion that's happening, and we're both of us are in this shared reality of something bad, right? You're angry or frustrated or whatever, and then getting out of it, and then thinking about how to approach it next time. That's definitely on the dad or the mom. The kid's not going to do that yet, right? So yeah, it's a constant struggle to, or a better way to phrase it, it takes a lot of energy to be deliberate about this stuff.
Right. So what I'm hearing in both of you is you used the word awareness several times, and so did you. I'm hearing awareness or a consciousness, and you both use the word choice. That's who you are, right? Who you are is a present and future thing. Every time you make a choice, which is a couple hundred times a day, you are developing and changing the course of who you are at every moment, right? Unless you're stuck in your old thoughts and feelings and beliefs. Unless you're like doggedly just in your head about those things while everything else around you is changing, well, then you're stuck. You're a fixed thing. But if you're aware and present, making active choices, you're constantly changing with the constantly changing environment. That's why I'm saying, like, you're not who you think you are. Because if you have a thought about who you are, well, that's old as of right now. Mm-hmm. Because you're going to make another adjustment tomorrow.
I have a question. We've talked, both of you you've brought the algorithm thoughts. Yeah. And I know in a previous podcast, there was something that really struck me and hit home with me, because when you enter into the equation external influences, right, when we get outside of our own minds and our own thoughts, and be it past, present, or future, there seems to be some inspiration, or dare I say, pressure to make certain decisions and choices based on what you're consuming. Yeah. And personally, that scares the living daylights out of me. I remember we had lunch one time, and it stuck with me, and I get the chills again, but you'd said something along the lines of, like, look around you, and who's running who here, right? Everyone's looking down on their devices, and who is truly making the choices right now? And I was like, oh my God, because I tend to be like, okay, that's when I'll go back to, let me just be in my little safe environment here. Like, ignorance feels so good. And if I'm...
Blue pill.
Yeah. Right? So when you guys bring up the algorithm, I tend to shrivel. I'm like, I don't know, but I want to be able to control my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, and not succumb to external pressures, right. Even though, and especially if they're influenced for bad, right? Because there's a lot of that out there. And I think I'm not one that would be, I don't even call it weak, but that would be prone or susceptible to that sort of influence. But like what you're saying does lead me to think, like, how much of that is part of who you become based on external pressure or external influence, especially now with what's happening on social media, right? What you see, and then ultimately what you're fed, and then what you make your choices based on, which seems to be truth, or appears, shows up as truth, right?
Yeah, certainly highly polished, high production values, right? What's interesting is we've always, as humans, at least for a very long time, at least since the advent of religion, and probably since the advent of kings and queens, have had some kind of external pressure to conform or to believe something or whatever. Religion really nailed it. Across any group of people, there's usually some type of religion that has really grabbed hold and is molding the society for good or bad, right? Whatever it is. But and then when we were kids, it was TV, right? And then billboards maybe, or something, and maybe radio a little bit. But it wasn't. There were always other forces too at play, whether it was going to church on Sunday, or your teacher at school, or your friends on the baseball field, or whatever. There was a lot of different sources to kind of create this more rounded thing, entity that's us as we grow up. I think what's really shifted, and it's probably Steve Jobs' fault more than anybody's, are these amazing iPhones and the smartphones that came. Because even the BlackBerry, when it first came out, it had its hooks in me for a long time. Everybody called them crackberries, right, for a reason. And but but nothing, and that was just simple email messages, like nothing like what a smartphone brings you today, and without any kind of algorithms to drive anything. Like there wasn't even spam when that really, like there's a little bit, but not like this constant torrent of marketing and scams or whatever else coming at you. And so as we've evolved, like, now we're here 2020, there is this constant presence almost of your smartphone, maybe supplemented a little bit by TV, but now TV is more of an escape from the smartphone, right? Yeah. And it's Netflix, which has its own little algorithm, but one that's not intentionally trying to radicalize you, right? Though it might end up doing it at some point. And so there's this constant pressure because of the smartphones and what they're bringing us, always with us, or at least with us 12, 18 hours a day. That's a big shift. And even for me, it's only been the last couple of years where I've really taken it seriously, that it's definitely something to be aware of. And it's almost visible. The pressure is so big, you can almost just imagine just this constant fire hose of something trying to change you or influence you. And being aware of it is the first step. And it's going to get way worse, I think, in the next 10 years because augmented reality is around the corner. VR is going to probably take off. So the production value and the quality of the messaging is just going to skyrocket to where it's just going to be so enticing, and maybe even part of your job that you're just going to have a hard time escaping it. And so, like, really figuring out how to deal with it, what it's trying to do, and that it's not necessarily a bunch of bad people in a room making the decisions, right? They're chasing money or whatever, but they're not deliberately trying to radicalize Nazis or whatever, but that is one of the outcomes of the work.
And I think that's the precipice we're facing, right? Depending on who you ask, we only have a very small amount of free will to begin with. If you ask someone like Sam Harris, he would argue that we don't have any free will. But I think most people, in general, if you take into consider your genetic makeup, your past experiences, your emotions, your hormones, there's we're talking like 3% of space for free will, right? And you throw in the algorithms on top of that, and that 3% is gone, right? So you're just run by hormones, past experiences, emotions, and you literally have no choice, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't even get to be who you think you are. You just get to be this reactive, emotional thing, like that is being run by machines, by smartphones. I mean, it's very much like the Matrix, mm-hmm. right? It's very much the blue pill, and so unless you actively combat it, we don't get to be who we want to be, and that should be super frightening for Americans, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah, it's interesting. My mom's up visiting, and she's in her 70s and was never a big technologist, right? As a member of the silent generation, but she's got an iPhone, and I was helping her. I forget what it was. I was looking for an email for her or something, but then I noticed her email feed is, she's from Alabama, and it was full of the hardest core right-wing things you can imagine. Like I knew she was like a bit of a Trump supporter and all that kind of stuff, but going through the email, how it's finally been tuned now, wow. where it's super high production value. It looks like real news. Newsmax is this right-wing org that they're sending the same polish that CNN would send you an email or any other top thing. And then there's these 10 or 15 different types of celebrities in that space that are all trying to make money off of this particular thing. And I'm not picking on the right. The left has a whole nother set of things just like this, right? But it was crazy that, every day she's reading these unbelievable conspiracy theories. Obama's a pedophile, and like all these, and kids are in basements. The Pizzagate's still going on in this world, right? Like Franklin Graham is sending an email how urgent it is to save the children from the pedophiles, like, and I don't know if Franklin Graham even knows, he's pretty right wing, but they're just like using his name, bolting it onto this stuff. And all of them end with some kind of ask for money or support, right? Or there's like petitions. I saw her respond to a petition like, save the kids from the pedophiles, kind of thing. And she went and gave them all of her information, this thing, right? And so now obviously I unsubscribed her from all that stuff and then subscribed her more mainstream news, like I try to give her a more holistic view of the world. So every day, but God knows how long she's been fed this stuff over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. And I don't think she's alone. Like
No.
I think there's a lot of people that are being drip fed on both sides or on all sides. This stuff, and the algos are radicalizing everybody.
Dude, all you got to do is drive like 70 miles south, and it's like there are protests, in Huntington Beach or Huntington Beach, Orange County, like full-fledged protests over wearing a mask.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even have to go. I don't think you have to go 70. You might make me 30 miles. I mean, it's an incredibly different environment. If you picked up my phone, so I use social media, what I would call it uniquely LinkedIn for business purposes, and then I have a presence on Facebook and Instagram, the Twitter channel, but I use Instagram mostly for business. And with what we do, we have a lot of social groups that we try to communicate to on behalf of our clients. Point is, if you picked up my phone and looked through my Instagram feed, and sometimes I laugh, because if my wife ever picked up my phone or my kids, it's mostly LGBTQ related, food related, or military related, because we do a lot of programs for our clients that try to reach and communicate with people that have followings in those groups. So those are people that I follow, they then follow me back. So it's hilarious. You might pick up my phone and there could be a lesbian couple making out in, fully tatted up bikinis. There's a lot of food based, like the most amazing recipes for things. And these are things I support, but it's funny because going back to like, you're not who you think you are. If you just looked at the social feed that I get, it's like, oh wow, this is what Noel must be interested in. And I didn't serve in the military. I support the military, but when all the profiles I follow for veterans, but it does show up as like, why am I getting this stuff versus others? I also follow a handful of friends, which I'm most interested in because those are my most personal and intimate relationships that I care the most about. But I follow the other stuff almost as sort of news, what's going on in these communities and what's happening. But it's back to that point, like not who we think we're, but like, yeah, someone else might see that or look at that, or if I'm being, so it is served up. And that part, again, it really scares me because it's incredibly influential in what we are being fed. But I guess what I struggle with is how important is the awareness of either the algorithm or what we're being fed, and our own free will to either fight against it or understand it or accept it, right? So those are the choices as I see them. And I am, if I wake up early in the morning, I get frustrated with my tracker on my own phone. I've already spent X amount of time. What did I read? Going from one news source. I try to toggle back and forth between both sides to get perspectives on things, and ultimately make up what I think is my own choice or decision or opinion about something, so I could talk educated but openly. And I'm totally comfortable with conflict, comfortable in the sense of I'm open to having it. I'm not comfortable like, oh, I want to have a conflict, but there are certainly lots of people that I grew up with that have completely alternate opinions than I do. And I don't necessarily want to get in dialogue with them, but I want to hear what they have to say, right? So those are the handful of things that if I stand behind something, like, okay, I can go deep on this. Politics is one thing that is an area I know what I believe in, but I don't necessarily want to get into a debate or a conflict. And a lot of that's happening right now around.
I mean, how could you not? I mean,
it's almost unavoidable now.
Yeah.
Like, I flew out here on Delta. Delta requires masks now, and to board the plane and while you're on the plane. And I was sitting next to an older lady, and her husband was across the row, and the middle seat was empty because Delta's doing that, which is nice. Almost everybody I saw on the plane was wearing a mask, but there's a lady right behind her husband. And so these people, I guess, my guess is they're probably like 70, right? And there's a lady who's probably in her 50s, late 50s, sitting behind We're leaving Salt Lake, right? And Utah's kind of a red state. And she wasn't wearing a mask. And the guy asked the flight attendant before we took off, hey, this lady's not wearing a mask. I feel like I'm in a high-risk group. Could you ask her to wear a mask? And you could see the lady's face, like, crunching up, like, I'm not wearing a mask. And I think, and it's interesting, and then Delta actually didn't do anything to her. She offered to move the older people to the back of the plane, which they declined. And then, we took off. And at first I was thinking, wow, this lady's really selfish. But I don't think it's that exactly as it is. She has been indoctrinated into, actually, you're an idiot if you wear a mask, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if she was convinced the virus was real and it was dangerous, she probably would wear a mask. But she's not. Like, and this has mostly been an algorithmic thing, even though, we have some leaders who might pour a little gas on the fire, but she's also been fed this from many different directions, that this thing isn't real and you're an idiot despite the entire plane wearing masks. Mm-hmm. And that's another just quick aside thing that's crazy about these times, because there's studies, they've done studies where, they set up a doctor's office and there's 15 people in the waiting room. They're all in on the scheme, and it's someone who comes into the waiting room who's not. And then they ring a bell and everybody stands up. And at first the person who was not in on the scheme sits down and she's like, why is everybody standing up? And then over, 10 or 15 minutes, the bell rings several more times. Then eventually she's standing up with everybody else, having no idea why. But we're not seeing that in this case. Like, the peer pressure thing is no longer creating the impact that it used to have, right? Like, we're all disconnecting from the tribal instincts. And that's like this other kind of crazy side effect we're seeing. So you can't depend on the village to still end up with some common thing.
We had some audio problems, and so we had to end the episode a tad early, but I think we covered a lot quickly. What I hear from this episode, especially from Noel, is that he's a choice. He is and becomes who he chooses to be. For example, Noel is someone who connects deeply with a few relationships instead of many that he used to do. He's also someone who shows up for friends and family. He's compassionate and thoughtful. He's a, quote, gentle and delicate balance in showing up as who he is, who he feels like he is. He's, quote, a delicate balance in showing up as who I am. I feel like life is like this, end quote. So what I'm getting from this is that awareness and choice are who you are. If you're aware and present and making active choices based on your consciousness and awareness of your circumstances, your desires, your goals and commitments, then who you are is actively changing and is not a fixed personality or a fixed quantity. You are the choices you make. What's also interesting to me about this discussion is that no matter who we think we are, and regardless of how much evidence we get that confirms or opposes the beliefs of who we are, we all doubt ourselves. We all go through the experience of trying to be who we want to become. And so what I walk away with from this episode is a sense of community, camaraderie, and compassion. We all struggle. We all doubt ourselves. And regardless of the result of whether we are actually able to actualize who we want to be or not, I think it's all fine because we all share the same journey together, regardless of whether we're successful or not. So by the end of this episode, I hope you all have the same shared feeling that I do, that we are in this together. We are not alone, and we all go through the same struggles. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.